Hi, good day. It's Michael McNeil here, Dr. Michael McNeil. I just want to do this question that's been buzzing around in me for the last couple of days. Very simple. Just want to answer a very simple question: why study philosophy? And then the second question that I believe is very applicable and important is why should Christians study philosophy? Because philosophy is not really a subject that I used to teach at senior schools, and you don't see philosophy taught explicitly really in what we would call primary or before 11 or 11 to 16. You might start to get a bit of it in, say, sixth form if you were doing some specialised subject. But really, as a subject, philosophy is not really taught. Now, in some countries, say like in France, instead of doing, say, like religious studies or religion, they might actually have philosophy as part of their curriculum, and that sort of like goes all the way back to the French Revolution and trying to make people think. So, in a sense, I've sort of like the first little hint of an answer to the question why should we study philosophy is because it helps you think. It trains people in what you would call critical thinking, to sort of, when somebody just says something, because not all opinions are equal, because one of the popular things in our, say, culture or our in our way of doing things is that we say, well, everybody got a right to an opinion. That's true, everybody's got a right to opinion, but not everybody's opinion is equal. You know what I mean? You can think that's trivially simple, because it's like if you're going to fly in an airplane or something, and you've got one person that says, well, I believe an airplane should do this. Why do you believe an airplane should be like that? Well, I feel like it should be like that. And you got another person says, oh, I believe an airplane should be like this. You say, why do you believe an airplane should be like that? Well, I've done an aeronautical degree and I've done advanced studies in there, and I know how wings should be designed. And you'd probably think, yeah, actually, that person's got more expertise. I'd rather fly on the plane that person designs than the person who just has watched a couple of YouTube videos on how to build a plane or something. So there is something there. That doesn't mean we should make a cult of being an expert, but it does make the point just trivially in a sort of a sense that not all opinions are equal. Everybody's got a right to opinion, fine, but some opinions are actually better. So let's think about this question, why should people study philosophy? Well, I'll answer that in a sense, in a narrative sense, because I'll tell you a story about what happened to me. I became a believer at the end of my first year, all the way back in 1989. It's 2024 now. That's 24, 34, 36 years ago. And at the end of my first year of university, when I was studying electronic engineering, I was about 21 because I couldn't go to university straight away. There was a gap. But I think I was probably 2021 there. And I sort of like at the end of the first year, I'd got myself in quite a mess. I was sort of a bit of a musician, and you're in that sort of environment, playing music all the time, and you're smoking dope all the time, and you're just living that sort of like lifestyle in it. And I'd got quite badly sort of addicted to stuff. And at the end of my first year, I sort of like had a personal crisis. I went and found somebody who he had meant a lot to us a few years previously, and they happened to believe, and they were living like in this commune, and it was amazing because on like a Sunday evening, they'd all be getting ready to sort of like, I'd be getting ready to go out and party or something, and getting ready to go to church. I couldn't understand it, and so I went along with this person a couple of times to their church, and it was just a completely different world for me, because I wasn't brought up in church. I'd never gone to church when I was younger or anything, and my mum had told me that God was an astronaut from a different planet, and my dad was virulently anti-religious. He'd been brought up in the Kirk in Scotland, and made to do all these religious things, and just hated it, and so I had no religious training at all. But there was something impacted me then. And it was a few months later, and I had a major overdose, and I just made a deal with God and said, if I don't die tonight, I'll promise to go to church tomorrow. And the church that I went to just happened to be the same type of church that my friend went to, and just, you know, I experienced the power of God, I experienced the healing of God, and it changed my life at that point. Doesn't mean my whole life sorted itself out. It took 3 or 4 months to get clean, and you know, it doesn't mean I was immune from, you know, well, I got married, had a divorce, and then, you know, my life hasn't all been smooth. You know, I'm not trying to sell snake oil here, but it changed my way of thinking. And all the way back at that sort of like at that time, you know, I was impacted. I felt the call of God in my life, but you know, you get married, things happen, and I never did anything about it. And in sort of in 2006, I was just one evening, I was working contract. You know, I had sort of 2 houses, sort of, I loved collecting Volkswagen cars, I had 3 or 4 cars. I was having a good time, you know, I was making a lot of money, doing a lot of stuff. And just one evening, 2006, I was just, you know, having a couple of beers, sort of like when watching, I don't know, Predator v Terminator or something, you know. And all I can say was that I felt as if the Lord Jesus walked into the room, stood between me and the TV. You know, there I was, beer bottle in hand, sort of like this. I was just like frozen. And he asked me a question, and then he walked out. And in response to that question, I decided to enroll in a university, go back part-time to study, and to study, I wanted to get theologically educated, so I registered on a BD degree. I thought I wouldn't be able to cope with the seminary. I just thought, you know, I like drinking beer too much, like listening to music too much. I'm not going to be able to cope with the seminary. And so, but I registered on a BD course at the university where I'd done my engineering degrees, and I you know, you pick your options and you say, I had to do it. The first year I did full time, and the rest of the time I had to do it part time because I had a bit of a financial disaster and got into a mess, and I had to change to part time. But the first year I did full time, and you get your timetable, you have to pick your options, and I had a hole in the timetable, and I thought, oh, what am I going to put in? And I thought, and it was something like philosophy, and I thought, oh no, I'm going to go into this lecture, and I'm going to hear all these crazy things about sort of God, crazy ideas about God that have come down, but I had to do something put something in my timetable, and I thought, well, it's only an hour, you know, it's like an hour a week or something. I'll do this, and I went to the. I can remember the first 3 lectures, like the first 3 weeks. The guy might have been speaking Mandarin Chinese or something. I didn't understand a thing. And when I say I didn't understand a thing, I mean I didn't understand anything. And then I can remember being sort of like being in this third lecture, and I could feel like my head kept wanting to tilt over to the left. I was like, what's going on in my head? I felt as if there was something going on inside my brain. It was really weird. And I was sort of like having a quiet time, meditating, praying a little bit. And I just said, Lord, what's going on in my head? My head feels really weird. And I felt as if the Lord spoke to me and said, you've been so busy living life that you've forgotten to ask the question as to why you are living life. And that sort of impacted, and what I felt was, it went on to say that something in your brain that's been ignored, asleep, unused, is starting to wake up, and it's, in a sense, it's thinking about life rather than just being caught in all the busyness of life and all the disasters of life and all that. Life's just so busy, you know, you're working full time, your marriage is in a mess, you know. Unfortunately my first wife got very ill, and then we divorced, and it was, and so life was just, you know, it's just horrendously busy and stressful, and you're just living, you know, you're just existing, just managing to survive. And so it was true. And so the first answer to the question, why should I study philosophy, and this is just a general one, is because you're finding out about the whys of your living. You're really asking them big questions that say, why am I here? Where do I fit into the universe? Is there any rhyme or reason in the universe? Are things just all random and contingent and nothing I do really matters? Well, am I here for any reason? And when you start asking philosophical questions, sooner or later, every philosopher or every philosophy course, even if it's run by a completely materialist, empiricist, atheist philosophy professor, or they are still going to deal with the question of God and why am I here. They might not, they might say that people have tried to fit God in and give an explanation that this is the old way that people used to think. God filled in all their reasons and the gaps in all their thinking. We've moved on, but they will still address this question of God. And I've got my undergraduate textbook, which I can put a link in. I will put a link in the description. But it said the question of God, and they got a lovely write-up on the back cover where it says, the concept of God is like this big philosophical confluence, like when rivers come together, one big river, and suddenly all these streams flow. And so God, the concept of God and the question of God, and it is one of the big philosophical questions. You may say there is no God, which is fine. You may conclude there is no God, but the concept of God, when you start talking about meaning, purpose, do I have any meaning? Is there any purpose? You're always going to ask. So that's, if you like, the number one sort of answer to that question. As you're asking about, when you study philosophy, you're asking those big questions and you're thinking about that, and you're not just being... Because there's a wonderful phrase that I heard recently, and it sort of like says that if you're not committed to anything, then you'll be deceived by anything. So you're going to be caught along. People can manipulate. If you're not going to stand for anything, that's it. If you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for everything. So critical thinking about things, they're really important skills. They're just good life skills. Now the second question the second part of what I want to answer is why should Christians in particular study philosophy? I can't speak for other faiths. I can't. But I'm actually asking the question: why should Christians study philosophy? Because when I became a young believer, for whatever reason, I got the real sort of like impression that Christians absolutely should not have anything to do with philosophy, all this worldly thinking. And I'm sure somebody read this verse to me. So if you've got like an old, you'll have to excuse me as I look down on the screen here. And if you've got like an old King James, and I think the New American Standard's a bit like this as well. If you read Colossians 2:8, it sort of says, beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. That's the King James. And if you read in the New American Standard, very similar. It says, see to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Christ. So there was this big demarcation, say, that's worldly thinking, that's going to take you to intellectual ruin, it's going to take you to spiritual ruin, you're going to end up taken captive and never be prosperous as a believer. You're never going to succeed in life because the world's going to take you captive. I don't know how, that was just the impression I got. I even felt guilty when I had a philosophy book on. I think I got Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy from some book club, quite cheap. And I felt guilty about having it on my bookshelf. I thought it was an ungodly book, a demon's going to attach itself to the book or something and destroy my spiritual life. And so, oddly enough, I still got that book. But other books I got rid of for that reason. You just don't know any better sometimes in your life. what do we do though? What do you do with that verse? What do you do with Colossians 2:8? Well, thankfully, if you've got access to the Net Bible, which I'll put a reference to the Net Bible in the description for the video. Now, the Net Bible has a very interesting comment on this verse in its notes. The Net Bible's like a big project where they tried to bring in all modern scholarship and critical scholarship, and it's it started as an online project. I think you can actually get printed copies of it, but it's actually called, I think it's netbible.org, but you can go in and it gives you all the Greek and that, and they've got a very interesting comment on the Greek. Now they've actually made a mistake in their describing their description, but their description nevertheless is valuable, and it is correct if you just correct somebody's obviously copied the note down wrong or something. But they've actually says that the way the Greek should be written is that I don't want to get too technical with the Greek, but it just sort of like there's a single definite article, and then you've got two nouns, and it's joined with sort of like with a preposition, and so the way it should be translated is how they translate it this way. They say, "Be careful not to allow anybody to captivate you through an empty, deceitful philosophy." So philosophy itself is not vain and deceitful, but it's when but you should not allow yourself to be captivated by an empty and deceitful philosophy. Now, the only way you're going to know what an empty, deceitful philosophy is that when you know what true philosophy is, and so the philosophy we should avoid is this empty or deceitful or vain philosophy. And again, the NIV translates it this way as well. So it's not just, they actually said, "See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of this world rather than on Christ." So the philosophy that we as Christians should know about is a philosophy which depends on Christ or on the Anointed One, or on, that's, in a sense, you have to unpack what does this mean on Christ. And so that was what I was trying to do in my doctorate, in a sense, was unpacking what does it mean on Christ. And another verse that's very, very useful in that sense, I'm gonna have to get the verse here, find the verse here. Say 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 3. It says, "For though we walk in the flesh," like in the human body there really, I'm using the New American Standard here, so the language is slightly, it's quite old version, so though we walk in the flesh, well, what does the flesh mean? It just means in this physical body. "We do not war according to the flesh, for the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ." Okay, so the principle of Christian philosophy is, because often you sort of like, when people talk about this verse and weapons of our warfare, they think they're thinking about the book of Daniel, they're thinking about the Prince of Persia, and you're thinking about this heavenly conflict. But here, what we're told is that in verse 5 it says, "We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing," or in other versions it says, "every thought raised up against the knowledge of God, and we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ." So the Christian philosopher is the one who is engaged in this. They're pulling down falsehoods and lies and deceptions, and you're understanding how people think, and you're breaking those patterns down. And again, for me, as part of my experience as a Christian, when I was meditating on it, that's something it's one of the times I really felt the Lord speaking, actually it was almost as if he was rebuking me and telling me off. This is almost like a Genesis 18 moment, when Abraham was suddenly pulled up and said, "Walk before me and be up." It's like God was rebuking him, because 10 years before, in Genesis 12, he'd come to Abraham and said, "I'm going to make you a great nation." Abraham had Ishmael and then wasn't interested in God for the next 10, 13 years, whereas Ishmael grew up, and then suddenly God arrested him and said, what are you doing? And that's, in a sense, that was a bit like my experience. I'd gone through 15, 20 years of my life and sort of just living life and not really doing what God was asking me to do. That was his question to me. When he asked me the question, he said, and I don't think I mentioned what the question was that he asked me, but he said, when are you ever going to do anything about what I asked you to do? And so, you just end up ignoring God because you're living your life. You think you're going to church, you're doing your tithes, you're doing all stuff you would think you're doing as a believer, but you're not actually doing what the Lord wanted you to do. So doing philosophy and getting expertise in that was what he wanted me to do. And so I'm passionate about that we need more Christian philosophers, because pulling down strongholds is not necessarily about fasting and praying and people doing prayer chains and casting down powers and principalities over their cities and or whatever. That may be part of stuff. The Daniel idea may be part of it, but the 2 Corinthians 10, the object of that is about the way you're thinking. Strongholds are in your mind and the way you think. And so pulling down strongholds means changing the way you think. And the only way you're going to change how you think is when you when you understand and you learn critical thinking. People like Tony Robbins and the great motivational speaker and stuff, and you'll go, all motivational speakers, this is the core idea. They're core ideas of biblical ideas. I believe the very first motivational speaker, he took his ideas from the Bible, but he said, I think he said in some sort of retrospect, he said, I knew that if I said this came from the Bible, people were going to think this is religious and they're going to completely ignore me. But the thought that is at the heart of all motivational speaking is from Proverbs, where it says, as a man thinks in his heart, in the very core of his being, so he is. And every motivational speaker is trying to expand that and change the way you think so that your life can be more successful. So philosophy is really about understanding and being critical about life and not just accepting what people say and not just accepting people's dogma, wasn't it? I think that's something that Steve Jobs, one of his famous quotes was, is that dogma is just the other way, it's just the thinking of other people, the way of thinking. It's not your own, you're not owning that thinking. So he said, don't be controlled by other people's dogma. So we've got to be like that. He was a great, astonishing visionary. You can watch him. I think you can watch an address that I think he did in 2003 or 2006 to a college student graduation speech. Amazing speech talking about his life, and so the people that think about things and critically think about things and assess and are not just confined by dogma are people that can be very, very successful people. So in a sense, that's how I want to sell philosophy, and that's how I want to sell philosophy to believers and Christians. It helps you think about the why you are here, and it helps you to structure your life and have purpose in your life and understand there's a reason for your life. Okay, so thanks for that. I've enjoyed this. I enjoyed sort of talking a bit about myself. This is nothing really to do with my thesis. It's just the question, but it was like the preamble. That's why I started in 2006, and I had to persevere all the way through until 2023. But I eventually sort of like got there. There's nothing worse than having a discussion or being in an environment with people and they don't know what they're talking about. And one of the big problems I personally feel with sometimes the intellectual level of a lot of believers is a bit the equivalent of being in primary school. People just, that's part not necessarily a problem necessarily with the church. It's more to do with our whole Western culture. If you've ever heard of a philosopher called John Dewey, who was an American pragmatist in the first, very influential in the first sort of 50 years. I think he started doing a lot of writing around 1880, and I think he maybe died in the mid-50s, but he's one of the most influential sort of like American philosophers who influenced American education to an enormous degree, American politics and that. And here's one of the things he is blamed for, whether or not we can, there might be some pragmatists and Deweyites out there who would take issue with this, but one of the things he's blamed for is that he said that the most important thing is the great democratic family. It's not the individual family, it's the family of the state. And what education is supposed to be for, he said, the state must educate your children because the most important thing is that people get trained into being a good functional member of the state. And when you read his work, one of the things he's saying is that he said really we should dumb down the population. He wrote something called the problems of the public, and he was saying that people have problems when they think too much. So really, what we need to do is we need to stop people thinking, so that and if we stop people thinking, then we're going to have a much more harmonious society because people won't be thinking about why they're here. And so it was a very, very, in some ways, very cynical. As a Christian, that's a very cynical way of sort of like of looking at being, of social planning of society. That you make people stupid so that they're more compliant. But it's a very, very influential idea in the West in the 20th century. And so. We see it in our culture all over the place when people say they're going to work, you work 50 days of the week and then you go for have a 2-week holiday in Ibiza. And when I worked in a factory, that's what your life was like. It was literally you worked 50 days of the week, you had 2 weeks off when you went to Ibiza, or and people go out on Friday night, get pissed and stoned, and that's just your life. That's it. If you've ever watched sort of Groundhog Day, got the two guys in there and they say, have you ever got the feeling that nothing you ever do in your life matters? And they go, yeah, that's my life. I said, but what if you could do anything? So it's a funny film, but but it's very cynical. That sort of that sort of like way of organising and of allowing politicians to put you on politicians put you on a reservation and then get the young women to marry the state, stay single, marry the state, and the state provides all your money for you. It's very destructive. It's very socially destructive, and so philosophy is really very, very much about training yourself to think and seeing the world, the wider world, and being involved in the wider world, and being able to understand what's going on in the world. And that's, I hope to, as I go through my thesis, this one's sort of like a bit of an adjunct, something on the side of it, but I wanted to sort of talk about why philosophy is important to me and why I think it is important. And so it feeds into so much more areas of your life, and understanding the way that the world understands your politics and the way socially, why the family is so important. There are all sorts of things as to why it helps you just understand the world. And when you understand, one of the important tasks of philosophy is when you're understanding the way other people think as well, and other cultures think. And we in the West are very, very individualistic. The individual is the centre of our universe. We as individuals are the centre of our universe. Even if we're trying not to be, that's just the way we are. Culturally, that's the way we are. Whereas my wife's Japanese, and in Japanese society, the individual is not the centre of the culture. The group is. And we just, and until you've experienced that, and the importance of the family group, and until you've actually been there and actually experienced that and actually realise, God, people actually think differently. So that's one of the tasks of philosophy, is to help you understand how people think, and the differences in the way people think, and the way different cultures interact, and the way we should interact. And some people get very, very cynical about philosophy, or give it a very limited role, and the best thing they say for philosophy is that maybe it helps us understand the problem. That's what you call the therapeutic or the elucidatory view of philosophy. All philosophy can do is really make what the problem is really clear. It can't offer any solutions, and that's very, very prevalent in analytic, especially in the analytic tradition. Philosophy's got progressively through the 20th century. It basically sort of like abandoned. We can never come up to any of these problems of life. All we can do is make them more clear. And so, if you like, that's what you would call the analytic function of philosophy. The synthetic function of philosophy is to try and take all these different ideas and then understand them. And the synthetic function is to then say, right, what can we do? How can we solve these problems? Analysis really is supposed to, you analyze a problem. When if you're, you do this all the time you analyze and break down a problem into simple component parts or whatever. And then, in order to try, the reason why you are analysing that problem is because you want to solve that problem. And so philosophers are supposed to be doing something rather than just understanding a problem, which is really important to understand the problem, but you're actually supposed to be doing something to help solve the problem. So that's why we should all be interested in philosophy, because we don't just want to be concerned with the mechanics of life, but we want to know what life is about. If ever you've had a life-threatening situation or something happens to you, suddenly your life arrests you, suddenly you realise, I'm not guaranteed tomorrow. So really I absolutely need to know today what the meaning of life is and what the purpose of life is. I might not have tomorrow. So on that note, I'll say goodbye. Again, I was supposed to be doing something short, nice short little snippet. I'm going to have to find out how to do these little these things, don't they? They do shorts and reels where they take little bits out of these long presentations and put them there, just the central thought. But the thought I do want to, but I think it's valuable to have this long form stuff as well, where you can talk, So if you do come across this, then and you want to ask questions and you want to leave comments, then please do. Okay, so I think I'll leave it there for now. But I will mention this because I met some guys at Westminster. I live in Newcastle upon Tyne in the UK, and I didn't realise, but there's actually something called Westminster Seminary UK that's based in Newcastle. It's associated with, I think, with the seminaries, not the Westminster Seminary in the US, but it is connected. It's a Presbyterian seminary, and they look great. They've got they do bachelor's and master's sort of like studies. So if I'll put like a link in the description to the seminary. If you're somehow, I didn't realise that in Newcastle was a centre at one time of English Presbyterianism. Presbyterian. The reason I'm not from a Reformed background. I'm from a sort of a charismatic Pentecostal background. So, but one great thing about Presbyterians is they're always great thinkers, and the Puritans and the Westminster Confessions, and so if you want like a good theological education, it's definitely something to consider. So there we go. I'll get on. Thank you very much again. Cheers. Bye.